Coming up on the South Air Report, Trump says the war on Iran is pretty complete. Pretty much, those are his words. Now, the markets are, of course, skeptical, with oil prices jumping to $119 before falling back to $90. As missiles strike across the Middle East, an online war is happening to content creators that are posting AI-generated fake attack videos, making it hard to tell fact from fiction. And of course, we're also looking at India, which has been quietly redrawing its digital borders for years, and what it means for free speech in the world's largest democracy. I'm Leticia Castro, and you're watching South Air Network. Welcome and thank you for joining us here at SEN. Let's kick things off with the latest on the Middle East conflict. Speaking from his Doral Golf Club in Florida on Monday, President Donald Trump told CBS News that the war was very complete, pretty much, claiming Iran had no navy, no air force, and its missiles were down to a scatter. At a press conference, he said the conflict would end very soon, but not this week, while also warning of further military action if needed. Now, his statements were somewhat contradictory. When pressed on a firm endpoint, Trump was characteristically vague. He said victory would come where they're not going to be starting the following day to develop a nuclear weapon. He then added, "We could go further and we're going to go further." Meanwhile, Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is not formally closed, but warned that vessels linked to the U.S. or Israel would be likely targeted if they were to attempt to pass effectively, barring them, while leaving the waterway open to others. Of course, the oil prices spiked above $119 a barrel briefly before falling back to around $90, with markets seeing Trump's comments as a signal that the conflict may be nearing to its end. For more on what this means for energy markets and, of course, for global prices, let's go to our energy and market specialist, Maliha Bengali, joining us from London. Maliha, thank you for being with us here at South Air Network. Now, while the conflict is flaring, oil prices are volatile and markets, of course, reacting to mixed signals from leaders. What should consumers and investors be watching for right now? And how likely is it that energy markets will stabilize anytime soon?
So yesterday we had a very interesting moment where the IEA is getting together talking about a joint emergency release, and they spoke about a release of 400 million barrels. As you know, the Strait of Hormuz is a very narrow water passway that takes about 20 million barrels a day of oil that flows through on a daily basis. And given the attacks on the infrastructure, we've seen about 80 to 90% of that shut down. And the world is very worried about how long this war can go on, which is why the prices went to as high as $115 per barrel Brent. Having said that, if you have emergency stockpile release of 400 million barrels, that should alleviate some of the pressure in terms of oil price. And that's why we saw the oil prices crash. Another thing that's really interesting is I think the cabinet, Trump, they sort of expected this war to go for maybe 3 or 4 days. They expected a quick in and out. And I think this has backfired massively given the retaliation by Iran on the US bases and how they're really controlling in the narrative here. And we can see that Trump, even like last year with the Trump trade tariffs, when he's taken hostage by the bond markets being volatile, the US equity markets falling, and the oil prices shooting up 30%, that's when he sort of usually tackles. He always chickens out. And that's why we think that was the main reason why he's pulling back, because there is no end to this war unless one of them pulls back. There's no exit point because Iran has done a very good job of retaliating and holding their ground. And right now, the whole world is worried about exports to Asia. If no oil flows, you've seen countries like Pakistan, India, rest of Asia suffering on back of lack of gas and oil reaching their countries. So this has become a global problem. But the reason why the oil might is probably settling down right now is because of this emergency release. It doesn't solve the problem, but it does alleviate some of the pressure.
Of course, yeah. So we're seeing those markets all over the world being affected by this. Now, oil prices, like you mentioned, spiked briefly after those comments from Trump. How do markets typically react to these kinds of mixed signals historically? What does that mean for short-term volatility?
Commodities are a very interesting market, right? It actually trades on expectations. So the day of Monday, yesterday morning, given the chaos over the weekend, because oil pipelines were hit, infrastructure, storage depots were hit, this war just took a completely different turn. Market was pricing in a complete shutdown of 20 million barrels per day. Now we've always said that this is a stoppage, but not a shortage. And I think that's why the market expected this to be a war with no end, and we priced extreme fear. After the comments yesterday, we are seeing some flow happening. We also mentioned last week that there are alternative routes from the Strait of Hormuz. You have this thing called the East-West pipeline, which is another route that can carry up to 7 million barrels per day of oil. And Saudi Arabia has been increasing flow on that pipeline to find alternative solutions. So the tightness is easing. I think that's what the oil markets are pricing, is the rate of change of oil flowing. It is slow, but it is picking up from the complete shutdown from last week. And that's why the oil prices are falling the way they are.
As they're looking for those other alternatives, like you mentioned. Now, with the Strait of Hormuz effectively restricted for U.S. and Israel, allied vessels, of course, also, how does this kind of geopolitical tension impact global energy supply and trade flows, despite these additional sources like the East and West pipeline also being accessible, but of course, in a limited capability?
So about 90% of Iranians' oil goes to China. So they are the biggest trading partner of Iran. So that flow has not stopped, right? Because they are obviously incentivized to make sure that China gets its oil. Plus, we also mentioned that China has a lot of oil in storage. So they're not suffering. The people who lose out are Europe, Asia. And I think that's why alliances are forming right now for them to condemn this attack against Iran and make some compromises and try to get the oil. But the biggest losers are the oil importing nations. We know India, we know other Southeast Asian countries. They don't store enough oil or gas, so they're really struggling here. President Trump even gave Modi, Indian Prime Minister, a sanctions waiver to get oil from Russia, which previously was not allowed to be bought. So people are finding a way because these countries are suffering.
Right, they have to make it happen. Now, for regular consumers and small businesses, for example, what should they expect in terms of gas prices, energy costs, or potential supply issues if the conflict continues to escalate here?
That's a really hard thing to say. If the conflict ends right now in the next maybe 5 or 10 days, I think that this will be a very short-term scenario because things are going to stabilize. I think the whole world realizes how important this is. And Russia and China are stepping in and putting severe pressure, along with the Gulf states. There's a lot of money invested in the U.S. And I think this is another reason why President Trump is backing down, because the Gulf states are saying that this is not going to carry on anymore. They're tired. They're getting hit a lot. And I think that's going to end this war sooner. If this goes on for another 2 weeks, it'll be a different scenario. You could probably even get into recession. But we don't think it is the goal because this is a midterm year. US CPI is obviously at risk with the oil prices trading up 30%. So Trump can't afford that, which is why he's sneakily, slowly pulling back to sort of ease the tensions. But Iran is making it very clear they have 6 or 7 demands. And as you mentioned, any vessel linked to Israel or US will not be allowed to pass through. But also they're claiming, according to some reports, that every country that actually gets rid of the ambassadors to Israel and US will be allowed safe passage. So Iran is actually demanding some incredible terms, and it remains to be seen how this plays out because President Trump will not give in. He's trying everything he can to claim that he's won this war, but we know that's not the case, and he's under severe pressure to pull back.
We'll see how it all plays out. Thank you so much, Maliha, for helping us understand what these developments mean for energy markets and, of course, for consumers. And while markets watch the Middle East, diplomatic tensions are escalating elsewhere. India and Pakistan have clashed at the United Nations Security Council, trading accusations over airstrikes, terrorism, and regional destabilization in one of the sharpest diplomatic exchanges between these two nuclear armed rivals in recent memory. So for more on this, let's go to our correspondent.
India and Pakistan traded sharp accusations at the UN Security Council on Monday during a session on Afghanistan, with New Delhi condemning Islamabad's recent airstrikes on Afghan territory as a flagrant violation of international law. India's UN envoy Harish Parvatineni said it was hypocritical for Pakistan to invoke high principles of international law and Islamic solidarity while carrying out airstrikes during the holy month of Ramadan that killed 185 innocent civilians, around 55% of whom were women and children, and displaced more than 100,000 people. He also raised alarm over what he called trade and transit tourism, warning that Pakistan was weaponizing Afghanistan's vulnerabilities as a landlocked nation by blocking trade and access routes. Pakistan's envoy Asim Iftikhar Ahmad hit back, insisting the strikes were legitimate counter-terrorism operations targeting threats emanating from Afghan soil, and accused India of supporting militant groups, including the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and the Baluchistan Liberation Army. He said Islamabad had provided what he called irrefutable evidence of India's collusion with terrorist groups attacking Pakistan. Ahmad also criticized India over its conduct in Jammu and Kashmir. Meanwhile, Washington has taken a significant step of its own on Afghanistan. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Monday designated Afghanistan as a state sponsor of wrongful detention, citing the Taliban's continued use of kidnapping to extract ransom or policy concessions from foreign governments. Rubio called on the Taliban to immediately release all unjustly detained Americans, including Dennis Coyle and Mahmoud Habibi, and to permanently end what he called hostage diplomacy.
Thank you. And while diplomats clash at the United Nations, the battle over perception is happening in a different arena, online. As missiles strike across the Middle East, a parallel war is being fought on social media, and it's proving just as hard to contain. AI-generated videos of fake attacks are going viral, not because of state propaganda, but because ordinary content creators are being paid to post them. Our correspondent has more on this.
As missiles flew over the Middle East, something else was spreading just as fast. Fake videos, fake satellite images, and a very real profit motive behind them. This video shows missiles striking Tel Aviv and was shared hundreds of thousands of times on social media. It was entirely AI generated, and the people posting it weren't state actors or propagandists, they were content creators chasing a payout. Platforms like X pay eligible users based on views and engagement. Post a video that goes viral and earn money. It's that simple. And AI has made going viral with conflict footage almost effortless. What used to take a production team now takes minutes on a laptop. A fake video of Dubai's Burj Khalifa in flames racked up tens of millions of views. Another fabricated satellite image of damage to a U.S. naval base was shared by a state-linked Iranian newspaper. The line between opportunism and information warfare is getting very thin. What makes this even harder to untangle is that people are turning to AI to fact-check AI. When viewers used X's own chatbot Grok to verify some of these videos, it told them the footage was real. The very technology people trust to cut through the noise is amplifying it. X has now said it will suspend creators who post unlabeled AI conflict footage. But critics say that misses the point entirely. The problem isn't the label, it's the incentive. Engagement and accuracy, as one researcher put it, are fundamentally at odds. And right now, in this war, engagement is winning.
And while AI is changing the way conflicts are fought and stories spread online, it's also at the center of a legal showdown in the United States. A major legal battle over artificial intelligence is unfolding. AI startup Anthropic has filed a lawsuit against the United States Department of Defense after the Pentagon placed the company on a national security blacklist. Let's see.
A major legal battle is unfolding between the U.S. government and one of the world's most prominent artificial intelligence companies. Anthropic, the AI startup backed by Google and Amazon, has filed a lawsuit against the Pentagon after being placed on a national security blacklist. The company went to federal court in California on Monday, asking a judge to block the designation and prevent U.S. agencies from enforcing it. The dispute centers on how artificial intelligence should, or should not, be used by the military. Last week, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth designated Anthropic as a national security supply chain risk. The move restricts the government's ability to use the company's technology. According to a source familiar with the situation, Anthropic's AI tools had been used in military operations related to Iran. But tensions escalated after the company refused to remove internal guardrails designed to prevent its systems from being used for autonomous weapons or domestic surveillance. Anthropic argues that the Pentagon's response crossed a constitutional line. In its court filing, the company said the designation was unlawful and violated its rights to free speech and due process. In a statement, Anthropic said, "These actions are unprecedented and unlawful." The Constitution does not allow the government to wield its enormous power to punish a company for its protected speech. The stakes are significant. The designation could threaten Anthropic's business with the federal government and could influence how other AI companies negotiate restrictions on military uses of their technology. Anthropic's CEO Dario Amodei has said the designation currently has a narrow scope, meaning businesses can still use its AI tools in projects unrelated to the Pentagon. But the political pressure is mounting. President Donald Trump has directed federal agencies to stop working with Anthropic, with the administration planning a 6-month phase-out of government use of the company's technology. The case could become a landmark fight over the future of artificial intelligence and who ultimately controls how powerful AI systems are used in national security.
That was Michael Shahuri reporting, and that legal battle over artificial intelligence also points to a much bigger question. How will AI be used in a national security warfare? Of course, that's another question, because while governments and tech companies argue over the rules on the battlefield, the technology is already changing the way that wars are being fought. So with this, maybe the first war where algorithms are just as important as missiles. Military officials say AI systems are now accelerating the entire pace of war, from analyzing intelligence to identifying targets in real time and, of course, managing missile defense. Tasks that once analysts took days for or even weeks can now be completed in just minutes. And it's not just about the strikes. Cyber operations are playing a major role behind the scenes. Reports indicate that groups linked to Israel used AI to help disrupt Iran's banking system, automatically scanning for vulnerabilities and deploying malicious code with minimal human intervention. But this new kind of warfare is also sparking a global technology race. China is closely watching and preparing for future conflicts where victory may depend less on the number of tanks or aircraft and more on who has the fastest, most advanced algorithms. Beijing has already developed drone swarm technology capable of launching hundreds of autonomous drones that can actually communicate with each other and dividing missions and continuing with operations even if some are destroyed. And unlike many Western systems, which still require a human in the loop, some of these drones could potentially identify an attack and, of course, go ahead and go with the attack targeting on their own. So the result is a new kind of battlefield, one where data moves faster than troops, where cyber attacks can disable infrastructure before the first missile is even fired, and of course, where the side with the best software may hold the most strategic advantage. Now, in other words, the future of war may not just be decided by firepower, but by code. And of course, the power of algorithms isn't only changing how wars are fought, it's also changing how wars are seen and how they may be remembered in the future. Because in today's digital world, the battle for narrative is happening online. So where data, language, and algorithms can shape global perception just as quickly as the events on the ground are unfolding. And now that information battle is drawing attention in Gaza. The English version of Wikipedia has recently referred to several Gaza cities, including Rafah, Bet Hanun, and Al Nasir, using language that describes them in the past tense or as former places. The change may sound subtle to many, but online, words matter, especially when it comes to this. Activists and media watchdogs say language like this can quickly spread across social media, where posts, AI summaries, and automated content systems often pull information directly from online sources like Wikipedia. In today's informational ecosystem, that means a single change in wording can be amplified by algorithms, repeated in posts, videos, and AI-generated summaries seen by millions. Experts warn that when digital platforms, search engines, or AI tools rely on this type of data, they can unintentionally reinforce a narrative, even if the reality on the ground is far more complex. So this concern is not just about one website. It's about how information flows through the modern internet, where social media, automated content, and of course, AI can rapidly shape global perception. In a war where physical cities are being damaged or even destroyed, the digital records of those places also matters, because in the age of AI and viral information, history isn't just being written by people. It's also written by algorithms. And when it comes to Gaza, every word online could help preserve the memory or completely erase it. And that fight over information online isn't just happening in the war zones. I actually worked on a piece earlier looking at India, home to more than 800 million internet users, where the government has been quietly redrawing the digital world they can access, from banning TikTok and dozens of Chinese apps after a border clash with China to tightening rules on Facebook and X. New Delhi is at the center of a global debate over national security, child safety, and free expressions.
Today, we're taking a closer look at India's social media bans, a series of government actions that have reshaped the digital landscape for over 1 billion people and sent rippling effects across South Asia and its global diaspora. From the banning of TikTok in 2020 to restrictions on platforms like Twitter, now known as X, India has positioned itself at the center of a global debate. Where should the line be drawn between national security, child safety, and digital freedom? Today, we're explaining what happened, why it happened, and what it means for South Asia, including tourist hubs like Goa and, of course, communities abroad. So let's start with the 2020 app ban. In June of that year, the government of India announced a ban on 59 mobile applications, most of them Chinese-owned. The list included TikTok, WeChat, UC Browser, and Share It. The government cited concerns over data security and national sovereignty, stating that these apps were engaged in activities prejudicial to the sovereignty and integrity of India. The timing was significant. Just weeks earlier, Indian and Chinese troops clashed in the Galwan Valley along the disputed border. Tensions between the two countries were at their highest in decades. The app ban was widely seen as a digital response to a geopolitical crisis. So by the end of 2020, more than 200 apps had been prohibited under Section 69A of the Informational Technology Act. But India's social media controls did not stop with foreign platforms. In 2021, new informational technology rules required social media companies to appoint local compliance officers, remove content within strict time limits, and trace the first originator of certain messages and respond quickly to government orders. Platforms including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, or X, faced compliance pressure critics, and they warned that these rules could impact privacy and free expression. The government maintained they were necessary to prevent misinformation, online extremism, and public disorder. Social media and child safety in recent years, well, this conversation has expanded to include children and teenagers. Indian policymakers have raised concerns about cyberbullying, online predators, social media addiction, and the mental health impact of the constant pressure and criticism on social media platforms. There have been calls for stronger and verification systems on stricter enforcement of minimal age usage and requirements on these platforms, like Instagram and Facebook, for example. Under India's digital personal data protection frameworks, companies may be required to obtain parental consent for processing the data of children below a certain age. Supporters argue that stronger regulation is necessary to protect minors in an increasingly online society, while critics say overly strict rules could limit access to educational and creative opportunities for young people themselves. Now on to tourism in a digital age. The impact of social media is especially visible in the Indian tourist state of Goa. It's very important. This area is known for its beaches, nightlife, and Portuguese heritage. Goa relies heavily on digital platforms and promotions to attract visitors from across India and the diaspora. Influencers, travel vloggers, and small businesses use the platforms to showcase hotels, restaurants, festivals, and cultural events. So when TikTok was banned, many content creators and small tourism operators lost a major platform for reaching audiences, and some eventually turned to domestic alternatives such as Moj and Josh. In a tourism-dependent economy like Goa's, social media is not just a communication tool, it's a critical marketing engine. For South Asians living abroad in the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States, and the Gulf states, social media is a digital lifeline. It's how many follow elections, social movements, entertainment, and daily life back home. So when content is blocked or withheld in India, diaspora communities may experience a different version of events than those inside the country itself. This creates what some analysts describe as a digital border. Information flows differently depending on geography, and for families spread across continents, that can create confusion, even a kind of disconnect. A regional and global trend in India is not alone in asserting greater control over digital platforms. Countries across South Asia, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, have temporarily blocked social media during periods of political unrest. As the largest economy in the region, India's digital policy decisions, well, they carry weight. With more than 800 million internet users, actions taken in New Delhi can reshape global tech strategies. Tech companies around the world now design policies with India in mind. So where does this leave us? For supporters, India's social media bans represent a necessary step to defend national security and protect children in a rapidly changing digital world. For critics, they raise serious questions about free expression, privacy, and government oversight. In Goa, the impact is economic. For young people, the impact is social. For the South Asian diaspora, the impact is personal. So as India continues to balance security, innovation, and civil liberties, the debate over digital rights in South Asia is far from over.
Now, of course, to talk more about how governments are shaping the digital world, we're joined by Nikhil Pawwa, the founder and editor of Media Nama in Delhi. Thank you for joining us here at South Air Network. I know India's moves, obviously, during the past few months has been to ban those apps and tighten the rules on platforms, certain platforms like Facebook and X, and redrawing who can see what online. How is this shaping the digital experience for millions, both inside India and, of course, around the world?
Well, I think the most significant move that took place in India was the ban on TikTok. And while there was a temporary problem where a lot of creators lost business, they lost reach, I think it's important to remember that YouTube launched Shorts and Instagram launched Reels within a month and a half to 2 months of the ban on TikTok. So creators found a new home, and those platforms have now grown rapidly, especially Instagram. It's now the most influential social media platform in the country, I would guess. And most creators have, I don't think many of them miss TikTok anymore, to be honest. And for the diaspora, they have access to Instagram and the content from India. One of the things about the TikTok ban that we need to keep in mind was the fact that at that time, because there were clashes taking place across the line of actual control, there was a fear that the Chinese platforms would be used to either push certain narratives or suppress certain narratives. And that's why the ban on Chinese apps was fairly comprehensive. It's not been reversed till now. And I doubt that they will be reversed, that ban will be reversed, because while China doesn't allow social media apps from the rest of the world to operate in the country, it has its own level of censorship that takes place with its own Chinese firewall over speech. It can't be that our openness should be our weakness globally. And so while China can push narratives, we also can't, it's not possible for global narratives to enter China. So I think it's not fair to compare the ban on TikTok with what's happening right now, which is basically the Indian government has given itself significant powers to censor speech and at pace. So platforms are required to take down content that the Indian government wants taken down. And some of these include criticism of both the Indian government as well as the Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Of course. Now, do you think that there's a risk that by banning these platforms, India isn't just blocking China or trying to protect children, but also silencing the grassroots, the creativity and voices that are important for a healthy democracy?
I don't think so, because they found a new home in Instagram and on YouTube. So creators have landed on those platforms. The kind of content that we used to see on TikTok is what we see on Instagram right now. So as long as there are alternatives, I don't think that's really had as much of an impact as one expected to. In fact, initially there was a surge in Indian platforms being adopted, but all of those have largely died out and or have significantly reduced reach. But Instagram is the one that has really flourished.
Right. Of course, they had to get creative, right, and try to restart on a different platform to be able to put their content out there. Yeah. And of course, when it comes to monetization, it's completely different on TikTok than it is on YouTube, than it is on places like Instagram or other meta platforms. Now, small businesses, tourism operators, and young content creators, of course, in places like Goa, lost their livelihoods overnight without compensation or a chance to appeal. Is that fair, do you think, or acceptable in the world's largest democracy, or is that okay because many of them, like you mentioned, shifted and went to other platforms?
Well, I think the platforms also had an opportunity to go to court and challenge the ban, and they chose not to do it. Yes, creators were impacted, but audiences that they had started looking for them on other platforms. So I don't think there's been a problem for creators. Some of them obviously never got the same kind of reach that they had on TikTok because TikTok's algorithm works differently.
Right.
But I don't think, the ban on TikTok is something that's impacted tourism in Goa. I'm not sure where this is actually coming from, to be honest. And it's been a while, and other platforms have flourished and replaced TikTok.
I understand. Many places in Goa specifically, a lot of small businesses definitely were impacted by these decisions. But are you worried that India's actions might give authoritarian governments a blueprint to block online platforms whenever it's politically convenient?
I don't see this as political convenience. I think that this was a defensive move because, like I said, I feel that there should be a different set of rules for democracies and a different set of rules for authoritarian governments. Like, China is an authoritarian government. It doesn't allow the rest of the world to operate within China. I don't see why, for example, like we should allow Chinese companies to operate in the rest of the world where, China can use it to push their own propaganda. It's the same thing that's happened in case of Russia as well. So, I think there has to be some sort of a equivalence that takes place where, for example, the US platforms are not banned in India and Indian platforms are not banned in the US. The same thing applies to the European Union. So we can't equate the democratic world with authoritarian regimes. And I think we need to have different rules because the authoritarian regime will use our openness to effectively target us, to push their own narratives without there being sufficient room for recourse, where the platform can actually decide what kind of narratives to use. There have been instances where Russia, for example, has been able to influence perceptions in different parts of the world, including running campaigns in India, that have, at least in case of some countries in Africa, had an influence on how those countries possibly voted in the UN. So let's separate authoritarian regimes from the democratic regimes. But yes, I do think that there is criticism due for the Indian government when it comes to censorship of speech that is critical of the government. And the 3R takedown requirement that has come in last month is completely unacceptable. That is censorship of free speech. That is censorship of platforms that enable free speech rather than those that are enabling political narratives. And we need to separate the two.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was Nikhil Padwa, founder and editor of Media Nama in Delhi. Thank you for joining us here at South Arrow Network today, sharing your thoughts on this situation. And of course, while governments are redrawing the digital boundaries, millions of users are still finding ways to connect online, sometimes in ways you might not even expect. Take Kpop, for example. It may have started in South Korea, but its audience is now global and growing at a fast pace in an unexpected place across South Asia, from India to Pakistan. Millions of young fans are streaming the music, they're learning the choreography and building huge online communities around Korean pop stars. Of course, our correspondent has more on this.
Why are so many South Asians obsessed with K-pop? Is it just a trend, or is there something deeper? Let's dive in. Some people think South Asians only like K-pop because it's trendy, colorful, and everywhere online. But that explanation only scratches the surface. Behind the choreography and polished visuals lies storytelling, vulnerability, discipline, and themes that feel surprisingly relatable, from ambition and heartbreak to family expectations and identity. K-pop is part of a larger Hallyu, or Korean cultural wave, that includes music, dramas, fashion, and food. Platforms like YouTube, Netflix, and social media make K-pop and related Korean culture easy to access anywhere in the world. K-pop is strongest in East and Southeast Asia, but it has achieved nationwide youth popularity in parts of South Asia, North America, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. In fact, India has become one of the top YouTube markets for leading K-pop acts like BTS and Blackpink, with India ranking in the top 10 countries for views for several major groups. The top 100 K-pop artists generated more than 90 billion streams globally across audio and video platforms in 2023, highlighting just how massive the genre has become worldwide. In markets like India, K-pop's audience continues to expand rapidly, with billions of annual streams driven largely by younger listeners discovering the genre through social media and short-form video platforms. The global K-pop industry is now estimated to generate well over $13 billion annually, supported by music sales, touring, merchandise, and digital platforms. Groups like BTS remain at the center of that growth, with tens of millions of albums sold worldwide, and some of the largest streaming audiences on platforms like Spotify. Meanwhile, Blackpink's Born Pink became one of the best-selling albums by a K-pop girl group, moving more than 3 million copies globally. And the fan base remains strikingly young. More than half of global K-pop listeners are estimated to be between 13 and 24, making Gen Z the core driver of the genre's global expansion. But it's not just online views. Live events are bringing K-pop culture to life. In Pakistan, a K-pop festival in Islamabad featured vocal and dance competitions, Korean quizzes, and cultural celebration, showing genuine interest across youth communities in performance and cultural exchange. One report estimates around 200 million active K-pop fans worldwide, and massive social media engagement. For young South Asians especially, consuming K-pop reflects a shift toward Asia-to-Asia cultural flow, not just Western dominance. So the love for K-pop in South Asia isn't shallow. It's rooted in emotional connection, global media exposure, community building, and cultural exploration. What started as catchy music videos has grown into a widespread cultural movement, one that crosses borders, generations, and languages.
It definitely does. So to talk about this global K-pop phenomenon and its growing impact in South Asia, we're joined by Jeff Benjamin, columnist for Billboard. Jeff, I know K-pop may have originated in South Asia, but of course, millions of young fans in India, Pakistan, and across South Asia are now engaging with it, streaming, dancing, and building that massive online community that we see. What is it about K-pop that makes it resonate so strongly in this region? And what are some of the underlying themes in K-pop that resonate with young people from so many different cultures and areas?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I love that video. It got on so many great topics. And I think, there's a lot of things going on here, specifically, the digital gateway, right? So many young people, especially in South Asia, are so digitally connected. They're on these platforms, whether that be YouTube, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, or X. All these things I think are really important to how K-pop is spread, because K-pop really does live online digitally. It really thrives in that way. There are so many huge updates that happen online, and if you're not following online, you're going to miss out on the updates. Right. So many of these things are very focused on that. And that was also accelerated by, the COVID-19 pandemic at a very critical time. For K-pop, a lot of people were at home, a lot of people on their devices, and were able to connect with K-pop in that way. But it wasn't just the fact that they were home or that, something flashy caught their eye. I really do think it is a lot of those shared cultural values, a lot of similar ideas about hard work, wanting to come together for a more positive world out there in that way. There's many things that I think resonate specifically when it comes to the K-pop messaging. And it's not so much about that sort of like Western rock and roll, sex, drugs, and rock and roll mentality that, I think a lot of Western artists portray.
Yeah, for sure. I understand. Now, how are fans in South Asia using social media and online platforms to connect with each other and with K-pop artists? And what does this say about the power of digital fan communities?
Yeah, I think this is everything. And personally, as someone who's been watching this specific music scene for, oh my gosh, over 15 years at this point, it really has been those digital communities that have been so key to making this fandom and this sort of interest in K-pop grow at the pace that it has grown for a long time. South Korea, the reality is that it's not a huge country, right? It hasn't been one of the biggest music industry players. Many times it was these fans and this dedication who were creating the digital communities themselves, sharing things with fans in their own communities, translating different news items, different lyrics, what have you. So many of these things are kind of the ways that the communities are able to thrive, whether that's in a local sense of fans coming together to meet up and dance and talk about their favorite artists, or really expanding to a more global message. K-pop itself is really, really in tune with a lot of these larger social digital platforms that we mentioned. And even something like many artists and many Korean companies have their own specific fan communities that they own, that they're exclusive content on. Many of these different things are kind of part of that community in that way. So it's kind of like creating its own ecosystem in that sense, where I think, to be honest, in the US, many companies have actually been trying to find a way to capitalize off the superfan or create these new platforms. But K-pop has been the one place that's actually been quite great at being able to actually create communities and fan communities. People do want to connect and actively use it.
Actually capitalize, on those communities. And of course, I know that the report it mentioned that right now we're focusing on Gen Z being the biggest fandom, but I do think it started with millennials. I see that you've been following it for 15 years, so have I. So of course, I agree with that. Now, K-pop fans in this region are learning the language, choreography, and the cultural trends, like you mentioned. So what does this cross-cultural engagement reveal about how global media is experienced by young people when it comes to music and when it comes to these online communities?
Yeah, I think it's just very clear that the demographics are really shifting, right? Because, on one hand, you could look at K-pop, but you can also look at, how India and how, the Bollywood channels on YouTube have become some of the biggest channels and most influential and watched channels, for all of YouTube. I think a lot of these things are changing because even, like we said, 15 years ago, K-pop or South Korea was not one of the major players in the local music market. Now it's been a top 10 market for, I think, almost a decade at this point. China recently joined that top 10 as well. So things are shifting and things are happening in different kinds of ways. But what I think is kind of the most telling and what you picked up on was the true engagement that's happening, not just with Korean music, but for Korean culture at large. It's not necessarily just about wanting to follow a K-pop star someone thinks is handsome or thinks is pretty, but rather K-pop is really great about integrating many aspects of the culture and getting their fans interested in Korean culture at large, whether that is including different Korean foods or Korean fashion in their visuals, taking part in different, Korean television shows, Korean dramas in that way. There's many kind of access points for K-pop fans and K-pop artists to be able to send their fans into other aspects of the community. And I think it's been a beautiful thing to watch the Korean language in particular be able to be something that so many people are adopting and so many fans are kind of getting really into, in large part due to K-pop being so specifically making such a point to make sure that English is part of their songs, but also Korean.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing your insights on how K-pop is connecting millions of fans across South Asia and shaping a global cultural movement, like you mentioned. And while South Asia is dancing to K-pop, the world keeps turning. And of course, there are other stories unfolding across the globe, and we have to cover them. Lawyers for Bondi Beach terror suspect Naveed Akram have asked a Sydney courtroom to keep his mother and siblings' names private, saying that they fear for their safety. A magistrate agreed to extend the temporary order until next month, citing global media attention. Akram faces 59 charges, including 15 murder counts. And 5 members on the Iranian women's football team have been given humanitarian visas to stay in Australia after their Asian World Cup exit. Now, Immigration Minister Tony Burke said Australian police moved the women to a safe location and other team members are also welcome to stay. The team faced threats after refusing to sing the national anthem before their match against South Korea, with an Iranian commentator calling them wartime traitors. And China is about to pass a new law called the Promoting Ethnic Unity and Progress Law. Experts say it could hurt ethnic minorities by making Mandarin more important than other languages, pushing Han minority marriages and requiring parents to teach love for the Communist Party. Critics warn it could further restrict the rights of China's 56 official minorities, including Uyghurs and Tibetans. And finally, while we've looked at conflicts, policies, global tensions, and of course a bit of music, it's important tonight to remember stories of courage and hope. In New York City, Mayor Zohran Mamdani welcomed Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil, his wife Noor, and their baby son Dean to Gracie Mansion after iftar, marking the first anniversary of Khalil's detention. Khalil, a Columbia University graduate student, last year was arrested by federal agents while protesting the war in Gaza and held for months, missing the birth of his child. Mayor Mamdani said Khalil had shown profound courage in exercising his First Amendment rights and a reminder of a human story, of course, and resilience that shine through even in challenging times. I'm Leticia Castro. Thank you for joining us here at South Era Network tonight. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.